It's my great pleasure to introduce this next session. Our first presentation is Telling Our Story, LGBTQ+ Tours at Colchester Castle with Ben Paites and Tabitha Blackmore from Colchester Museums in Essex. Ben is one of the collections and learning curators at Colchester Museum, and one aspect of his role is community engagement, working with local communities on various projects aiming to improve representation of marginalised groups within the museums. Tabitha is an A-level student studying history, Latin, Spanish and theology, who has been delivering tours about the LGBTQ history of Colchester. As a young queer person, telling these stories is crucial for understanding modern society and a modern LGBTQ identity. If I could welcome you both to the stage. Thank you.
There we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Paites. I'm one of the collections and learning curators at Colchester Museums. I am incredibly delighted to also introduce you to Tabitha, who is one of my team of volunteers who delivers the tours that we'll be talking about today at Colchester Castle. This talk is going to kind of cover a few different things. Some of it is about kind of my journey to creating these tours and having a wonderful team of volunteers deliver the tours. But also kind of a little bit touching on approaches to LGBTQ+ history within museums looking at collections, because I know a lot of organisations struggle sometimes telling these stories. Maybe they feel like they don't have the collections to tell those stories. Maybe they feel like the communities are not going to be positively responsive to telling those stories. But hopefully you'll see that there are kind of lots of different ways of going about doing this, and hopefully one of those approaches might be suitable for what you do in your museums. So where it began, this is a shot of Colchester Castle, the inside, after the redevelopment of 2014. So for me, it began a long, long time ago. I think it was even before I was a curator, actually, at Colchester Museums. I had a different role before then in the museums. But there was a programme on social media called Pride in Museums. I don't know if any of you could remember that. I think it might have been about 2016, 2017, something like that, where museums across the country were sharing their stories of LGBTQ+ history, mainly through collections, but sometimes it was through stories of individuals that happened to live in the areas where these museums were. And so I kind of started to have a think, and I think I approached some members of the museum service to ask whether they knew of any collections or any stories that we had in the local area that related to LGBTQ+ history, and got a resounding, I don't know, probably not. We're quite a small town, really, in Essex, although it's kind of quite a significant historical town, has been around for thousands of years, but, you know, it's quite difficult, really, to think of what stories there might be. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe there's not. I was early in my career. I wasn't really sure what the stories of Colchester were specifically at that time. My background's Roman archaeology, so after AD 410, my history knowledge sort of stops. Not anymore, I will hasten to add. I've learned a lot about later history since then. But I kind of thought, well, I'll play to my strengths. I'll do a bit of research in some of the areas that I do know and see what I can find. And so I kind of started looking into the collections, and I started to kind of think about what we could possibly talk about and what we could possibly share history-wise. I think my next slide actually is a stiff button. So going back to what I said, some of the responses that kind of people often come back to you with are, we don't have anything relating to LGBTQ+ history in the collection. We're just a small town. There's never been anyone like that there. Genuinely, some people say stuff like that. It's quite shocking. Well, if we do that for them, we have to do something for all minorities, which is fair. You should be doing everything for everyone. So these are some of the responses that I've kind of encountered, not in Colchester Museum specifically, but I know that other people working in other institutions come across these barriers and these kind of questions when trying to share stories of LGBTQ+ history. But then I did my delving and my looking and managed to find objects that had very clear national connections to LGBTQ+ history. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. We've got some things. There's still only a handful of stuff, not really a lot to do anything with. So I then did my research into what other museums were doing when I came across the V&A, and the V&A were doing they sort of almost just started doing their LGBT tours at the V&A. And I booked onto a training session that they were offering at the time, where you spent a whole day at the V&A, where you learned about how they developed the tours. It was a fascinating mix of quite high-level academic theory with just a wander around the galleries pointing out stuff that they thought was LGBTQ+ related. Both perspectives were really useful and interesting, but it made me realize that actually one of the best approaches to kind of looking at history in general, not just LGBTQ+ history, but as museums, we're all about telling stories. So it's finding stories, that's what we're doing. We're trying to find these stories to tell. And then you can find different ways of telling those stories. And the V&A approach, which has been adopted by quite a lot of places now, is all about using objects as springboards. So some of these statements might be correct. There might not be individuals in those museums or in those collections that were explicitly, openly LGBTQ+. But there are objects that we can use to tell stories of LGBTQ+ history and culture that you might not have considered in the past. So, making a start. Do something rather than do nothing. So all of these objects have links to LGBTQ+ people in different ways. The object on the left is, of course, a handkerchief. And the hanky code is something that was initially adopted in the Midwest of the United States in the 1800s as a way of differentiating male and female dance partners in gold rush towns where there were no women. So men were pretty bored in the gold rush because there wasn't a lot to do other than dig for gold, but they loved to dance. But with no women, of course, men couldn't dance with each other, but they did anyway. So they used colour-coded handkerchiefs to know who was the male and female partner in the dance. That was then later adopted by gay men as a way to identify other like-minded people, shall we say. And the hanky code then developed further to include lots of different colour codes for different purposes, which I'm not going to go into today. You can use your imagination. But that is how we use an object. That hanky has absolutely no connection to anyone who is LGBTQ+, but it tells a story. It tells us a real story of LGBTQ+ history through an object in a museum collection. Lipstick in the centre. I realise I'm very pressed for time. I probably had much higher ambitions for this talk than the time limit. We have lipstick in the centre. So some, it's sort of a bit more of an outdated use of the term, but some lesbians sometimes use the term lipstick lesbian. So we use kind of lipstick to talk about this idea of different types of individual within the LGBTQ+ community. Similarly, at the bottom, we have a bear. Some of you may have come across bears. So bears are larger, hairy men within the gay community. And that is a Roman jet bear that's on display in Colchester Castle. So again, not directly related to the community, but it's an object that is used as a springboard. And then we have this lovely mermaid vase that's in Ipswich Museum's collection. And mermaids have a very long history of being connected to gender fluidity, different gender identities. The idea being perhaps that these are creatures in liminal spaces in the sea that go between two identities. Are they human? Are they fish? And there is a charity in the UK, Mermaids Charity, which is a kind of transporting charity. And so mermaids are another story that you can tie into stories of LGBTQ+ history. So this is where I started, is kind of these tangential stories, these ways of kind of starting that conversation and saying, actually, there is a history here. We might not have those direct objects, but there is a history here, and we need to share that history because it's part of every community everywhere and always has been and always will be. And then I found the real stories of real people connected to Colchester and the local area who have ideas kind of or potential histories related to LGBTQ+ identity. So we have King William II, the son of William I, the Conqueror. So Colchester Castle, which is where one of our museums is based, is a Norman castle and was built during the reign of William I. And so his son, King William II, came along a bit later. Now, there are accounts, usually a little bit after the time, but there are accounts of William II reinventing, in a sense, the court that had been established in England at the time. He attracted a lot of young, he brought in a lot of young, attractive men to his court. There are accounts that describe things such as the effeminate predominated everywhere, and there have been a lot of people who have suggested perhaps that King William II was in fact either gay, possibly bisexual, or at least there may have been some question to his sexuality. Whereas historically, with a lot of monarchs, people have assumed that they're heterosexual because of this kind of perceived lineage that we have from William the Conqueror to the modern day, which doesn't exist. There's a lot of breaks and a lot of things in that history where there were no descendants and they had to bring new monarchs in. So he is kind of a starting point, really, for the kind of history of Colchester Castle and its connection to LGBTQ plus people. Then we have William Gilbert. William Gilbert is a classic warning tale that I use for one approach to looking at LGBTQ plus history. So often people will find historical figures and say, well, they never got married, they never had any children, therefore they must have been closeted gay people. Which could be true. We're looking at historically at a time where it was not allowed to be openly homosexual or bisexual or have any kind of romantic feelings towards people of the same sex. But this hugely obscures a relatively significant part of the population who are asexual or aromantic. So people have no sexual desire or romantic desire for anyone. These people, of course, exist in the present day and have always existed and always will exist. Perhaps William Gilbert was someone like that. There was a historian at the time who documented William Gilbert's life and said that he chose to focus his life to his career for the purpose of something along the lines of for the purpose of improving his brethren for kind of, so he was a scientist, I should add, but he kind of dedicated his life to his career as a scientist to better humanity rather than focus on his own personal needs of finding a wife, having children, etc. But maybe he had no desire. Maybe that's why. He didn't want to have a wife. He didn't want to have children. And then we have Neil Layard, a much more recent example. She spent a lot of her time in Ipswich. She was an archaeologist. She did spend some time in Essex as well, not specifically in Colchester necessarily, though we do have some things in our collection that relate to Neil Layard in Colchester. But she spent a lot of her later years, she met, I think it was in her 40s, she met a woman named Mary, I can't remember her surname, I apologise, but Mary. But the two lived together quite openly in a house, and they went on holidays together, they travelled together. Mary would illustrate a lot of the archaeological finds that Nina found, and they died and they were buried together in Kelvedon, in the churchyard near where they lived. So obviously they're just best mates. There's absolutely nothing else going on between these people. But there are stories of, because of course none of this was explicit, and I am very much an advocate of talking about possibilities and maybes. I don't think there's anything wrong with possibilities and maybes. I know museums are often seen as these bastions of knowledge, of truth, but truth is always changeable, knowledge is always changeable, so yeah. But these stories only came about because I started looking at those smaller connections, those more tenuous examples, and that's how I ended up developing the tours of Colchester Castle that now, once run just by myself, so once in a blue moon when I had the time, are now run regularly every second Saturday of the month by a lovely team of volunteers. So I'm going to hand over to one of those lovely volunteers to talk a little bit about their experience. I think, actually, am I? Oh, that's still me. So yeah, there were some outputs. Sorry, Tabitha. You're after. So exhibitions didn't happen for us. We didn't do exhibitions. It's a tiny screen. I can't actually see what the next slide is. That's why. So exhibitions, we didn't do exhibitions in the end. I consulted the community, and they said they didn't want an exhibition, which is why the tours were sort of developed as an alternative. And online content is another thing that we've developed. So we have our collections. Some of them are online. And we kind of have some resources online that talk about LGBT history broadly, like I started off with, and then with some local figures and local stories to kind of add to, for teachers kind of teaching in schools to add to some of those stories. But of course, other places have done things differently. This is Queer Britain, so they do have exhibitions and displays. Lots of other museums have done physical things in their museum spaces. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways in which you can disseminate the stories that you come across relating to LGBTQ plus history. And this is now we're talking about volunteering. We then decided, as I said, I was trying to deliver these tours when I could. It was very difficult to kind of do them regularly, and then we started to recruit volunteers through Colchester Museum's website. And now I do have a wonderful team of volunteers, and I will hand over to one of them for the next.
I apparently didn't format that correctly. As Ben said, my name is Tabitha Blackmore, and I have been delivering these LGBTQ+ tours at Colchester Castle. Now, for me, as a young queer person, the opportunity to deliver these tours and to teach about subjects so close to my heart while learning more and more about it has been incredibly valuable. Queer history has been hidden away, altered to fit an agenda, or given a modern beginning at Stonewall, but this is so far from the truth of the actual history of the queer community that has stretched the entire expanse of human history. As a young person, young people are exposed to many different lines of thinking, and in order to ensure that we understand our society, the communities within it, and make informed, considerate choices, we need to understand all the different experiences and stories that have forged our modern society. So, the stories of women, people of colour, disabled people, and of course, queer people. History can also be seen as elitist and dry, purely made up of battles and legislation, and entirely removed from today, which has been worsened by recent things like the government decision to cut funding for Latin in state schools. Yet social history tells a completely different story. From delivering the tours at Colchester Castle alone, I have learned of individuals like William Gilbert, as Ben previously mentioned. I have learned about how Julius Caesar's relationship with the King of Bithynia was received, negatively and positively, and the origins of different words associated with the LGBTQIA+ today, and the powerful stories behind them. But for me, the most valuable thing that I have learned from these tours is the history of gender and sex, specifically transgender people. In the current political climate, where transgender people are treated more as discussion points than human beings, it is more important than ever to understand their history and to know that they have always existed and always will, regardless of any legislation. Overall, my experience of delivering these tours has been incredibly positive, and it has shown me both the interest and ignorance people have of this topic, and has encouraged me to further research and continue to learn and teach about this, and so I can share these crucial stories and experiences. Thank you.
Almost. One more second. Sorry about that. You've got to listen to me for just another minute. So the reason why we decided as well to get volunteers and to recruit volunteers to come and deliver these tours is because we needed, as the title of this talk suggests, to ensure that the voices of the people with lived experience are the ones telling these histories as well, that we have people from the LGBT community. I'll hold my hands up, I'm a gay man as well, so I am from the community. But as we've seen from some of these examples, LGBTQ+ is so broad and covers such a range of different experiences and people. You can't have one person being the sole voice for that community within a museum. And so Tabitha and the other volunteers, and myself on occasion, will continue to tell those stories and to promote the history that, as we've said, has existed for thousands of years. It's not a shorter than a century history. This is something that goes on well back into the past. And just to end on a shameless plug, my book coming out next month. If any of you are struggling to find stories, you are more than welcome to buy a copy of my book and have a look. So it covers a whole range of things. The chapters are grouped by historical figures, the natural world, communities, language, symbolism, and mythology and folklore. So it covers a whole range of different topics, and every single object, 50 objects, every single one is used as a springboard to talk about LGBTQ+ history and culture. I guarantee you will have an object that relates to one of those things in your collections, so you can use that as a kind of springboard. But of course, there are also other places doing some of this work as well. And I'm sure there are organisations in your local areas that you can go to too. So Outhouse in Colchester, shout out to the Outhouse. They are one of the few LGBT charities in the east of England that actually has a physical space that they own, that they work out of. So I've consulted with them on and off over the years with some of this work. And doing research by kind of looking at other museums' collections and talking to other people doing similar work. finished. Thank you.